But ultimately, the big problem is that driving the car is fantastic, but doing things in the car is targeted at being, a daily driver that is fun to drive, but at the end of the day, the key parts are daily driver. When you're driving long and you're trying to, pay attention to the road, in order to do simple things like change the volume of the navigation that's being spoken to you, you don't know where it's at, you don't know if you're even interfacing with the volume for the navigation, changing radio stations, simple things that should be something you can do without looking, should be something that should be muscle memory, cannot be done. And I find that to be distractive, and I find it to be somewhat dangerous in a way. So I don't think that there was a lot of thought put into the in-car entertainment system in this vehicle, and I think there should be some real changes in whatever new system Mercedes comes up with in the new S-Class. I believe it's going to debut, and there was a big touch screen that I've seen in the spy shots. And then lastly, when we want to talk about its competition, so the competition is obviously the M5, but if you want it in the long roof wagon form, that's not a thing. You have the Audi RS6, which we're getting in the United States for the first time. Personally, I haven't driven an Audi before that I've walked away from and enjoyed how it drove. I'm also a bit concerned with the amount of screens in that vehicle. I do not know personally, so this is just pure conjecture, but there's a lower screen for the HVAC, which I find to be okay. But I'm concerned that actually interfacing with the radio for things like changing the volume might be a on-screen touch, which hopefully is haptic and hopefully is not a thing, and they still at least have a analog volume knob and simple, press buttons for very common features that people might want to hunt for in the dark, or by taking their eyes off the road. And then, in my personal opinion, the next closest thing to this as an overall package would be the Porsche Panamera, which you can get in the wagon or a sedan. However, I personally think that the Panamera is much more engaging to drive. It just feels better from behind the wheel. You sit lower in the car. The car, I don't want to say wraps itself around you, but you feel more like you're in a smaller vehicle, even though that is physically larger than this. So it is 55 inches in height, at least for the standard model, and then when you get, 56 inches in height, and then for the Panamera GTS, it is 55.4 inches in height for the sedan, plus 0.2 inches for the wagon. So it's lower than the E63, and it's much wider. It's almost 3 inches wider, and it's about 2 inches longer. So its stance on the road looks better, and that's a subjective thing. That's not objective. But because of the packaging and where you sit in that vehicle, it just feels sportier to drive. The turn-in's nicer on the car. You can get rear wheel steering on it. You cannot in the E63, which is really nice when you're trying to turn around in a parking lot. And it also makes high-speed stability really nice when you're trying to change lanes on 120 miles an hour. The car just kind of floats to the next lane. The fit and finish and the materials in the Porsche are much nicer. For example, in the Panamera, you would have all of this top piece in leather, as well as the lower bits in leather. All the leathers are the exact same materials throughout, so you have this consistency in feel and finish in what you're looking at. You still have traditional buttons to do very important menus. To do very important menu interactions, such as change track, previous track, volume up, volume down. You get on-screen indicators of where your volume is going for all menus, not just audio. And I just think it's a nicer place to be. However, the problem comes in its price. A Panamera that genuinely competes with this E63 would be the Turbo. The Turbo has, I believe it's 550 or 560 horsepower. So it has a power that's, in the same ballpark range as this 603 horsepower AMG. But the price point for that, it's a $155,000 start. And then typical Porsche terms, you're talking, anywhere from $15,000 to $40,000 in options. Versus this is fully loaded with everything, including ceramic brakes, at high 130s, $140,000. So that's that's obviously a big differentiator between the two. The Panamera also rides substantially better. In the Panamera's hardest suspension mode, because specifically the GTS trims, hardest suspension mode, with the suspension lowered as well, it's smoother on road. I haven't driven it at high speeds, but I've driven it at highway speeds, and I've driven it on Michigan roads, so I can definitely speak for the road quality and the suspension quality of the vehicle. But it rides smoother than this does in its comfort mode, where the suspension is raised, to normal height, which is a little bit more suspension travel than what you get in the Panamera. And this actually, one thing I do want to mention, I think a lot of what attributes to the what I would call overall pretty mediocre to quite poor in some modes, driving quality is the thin sidewalls. This is a 275, 35, 20 in the front, and a 295, 30, or is it 35, 20 in the rear, versus on the Panamera, where the sidewalls are the same. You're still talking 35 and 30, but the front section on that car is a 275, so the same size front, but the rear is a 315. If you know anything about tires, the middle number is a I want to say percentage, it's a ratio of the width. So because it's a 315 in the rear, you get a taller rear. It's a much plusher ride, and yet there's still more body control. There's still less body roll when you're doing something stupid in the car. You're actually pushing the car into a turn, and that was in the particular GTS that I tried without the PDDC, Porsche Dynamic Drive Control. That's the one with the sway bars. In the center of the sway bar, there are several clutches, and they open and close, basically to give you this variable sway bar, so it can either be soft or it can get really firm, so you can have a lot of body roll when you're just kind of driving along and you want it to be smooth and all that, or they can keep the car super flat no matter what you're doing. But the big thing that people have to remember is that the Panamera is an S-Class competitor, so it should be nicer, and it is priced accordingly. Technically, the E-Class is like a 5 Series A6 competitor, so it wouldn't be as nice. But I do feel that at $140,000, or the base price on these is $112 before you start adding things, I do feel that some more care and attention should have gone into this vehicle. I've read in a handful of magazines that some of the E63 buyers have quite the garage. They have pretty serious collections, and this is a very popular vehicle among that set. So you would just think that this vehicle would just be more of a sum of its parts cohesive kind of thing, and I just feel like it fell short in a lot of areas. I had a lot of high hopes for this car. It's the first time in a while that I have purchased a vehicle where I felt something was amiss. I don't dislike the vehicle. I mean, if I had to give it a grade, I'd say it's just a solid B minus kind of thing. When I'm just driving it, it's awesome. But I'm still in this honeymoon phase of enjoying the car, getting out, pushing the car a little bit on mountain back roads. I have concerns that once that period is over and I actually live with this, going to the office day in and day out, it's going to wear on me. So I'm actually already looking at Panamera GTSs. I'll probably just submit an order here after a while, and I don't know, let this thing go, because there's a couple people who might be interested. So, great car to drive, not a great car to live with. I think it's a darn shame, personally. One thing I will say that this has over the Panamera that I think is very key for a wagon owner. Let's turn this guy off. Yes, I know, don't forget my key. Ugh. One of the key things, God, I hate this limo tent. There we go. Low loading floor versus the Panamera, where it's kind of cut into the body, and it's noticeably 2 or 3 inches higher. So you have this lip to get over, to get into the rear loading trunk. I think that's Really nice that this does not have that. It's just a flat trunk. And then the seats, by far some of the flattest lying seats I've ever seen in any vehicle outside of a minivan. So, you know, most rear seats, when you put them down, they still have somewhat of an angle. I was pulling this number out of my butt, might be 10, 15 degrees, versus this where they genuinely lay flat. And I think that's really nice when you're trying to load really long things. You know, I think they really hit that on the head there. Oh, another thing I do really like about this is that the privacy cover is powered. It was disconnected, so it didn't go up this time. But normally, when it is fully extended and this goes, and the tailgate goes up, this goes up into this track automatically, which I think is a really, really nice touch. Oh, and then lastly, there's no annoying chime on the way down. Most cars sold in North America have the chime on the way down.